I'm not joking, I genuinely do believe that you, watching this video now, rolling your eyes at this stupid attempt to make you subscribe and like the video, because you already did that anyway, right? You are canon to the Dream SMP lore. How? Well, watch on to find out. Okay, so the entire idea for this video came from this stream that Fundy did a while ago, in which he coded a plugin for the Dream SMP server that allowed people who subscribed to him on Twitch to appear in-game as these tiny little colored avatars, tiny little Minecraft skin type things that had the subscribers' Twitch names above them. These subs also had a bunch of interesting attributes, which we'll get into now. Number 1. They'll follow the person that they're subscribed to and will always spawn near them and remain as close to them as possible, as you can see from this clip.
Get away from the children! Run!
Wow, they're kind of fast!
Number 2 though, and probably more importantly, they mimic their leader. They do basically whatever that person is telling them to do. If Fundy crouched on this stream, they all crouched, and though that doesn't seem important now, it becomes super interesting later on in the explanation of the theory. The plugin Fundy added also opens up a bunch of new doors because, as H-Bomb and Foolish showed, the subs were impervious to most forms of damage except being directly smacked by a player.
No, now they're just nice and toasty. Ooh, wait. Nope, they don't give a shit.
I just gotta know, like, will it make them skip a beat, you know? Like, do they go flying? Like, does that do anything?
Oh, no, they don't go flying.
No.
And that includes TNT, as you saw in that clip. Again, that doesn't seem too important now, but it becomes very, very convenient as an explanation for later on in the theory. Speaking of which, let's move on, shall we? Okay, so we know that Fundy has an audience that somehow manifests itself on the SMP, but what if you're not a Fundy viewer? How would you be canon? Well, you're in luck, because there are 3 other people on the SMP who have canonically confirmed that their chats are also canon to the Dream SMP lore, although they aren't physical like Fundy's, which I mentioned first, to try and provide context and set a precedent. The first of these 3 is Ranboo, the Enderman hybrid turned main character, who has a habit of making his lore extremely centered around the struggles and internal dialogue of his character, struggles which he, therefore, goes through on his own streams with next to no one else. The thing is though, a large part of character development is having an outside source of information or discourse, or even just people to listen to you. Now, Ranboo is an Enderman, or at least has a lot of Enderman properties, and from this clip of an Enderman in Minecraft, tell me if you see anything that might be relevant to what I'm talking about here. If you are liking this video so far though, feel free to follow me on Twitch. I stream when your favorite streamer might be not live and when you just have no other content to consume, so go drop me a follow, it's down in the description. Back to the video. What I'm trying to get at here is that it's canon that Ranboo's chat, the people he spoofs his talking to in his monologue-esque character developments, people who give him information in some parts of the lore, are canonically these very Enderman particles that you can see present in the clip before that are present around Ranboo, which he can see, hear, and talk to as a group, just like a Twitch streamer might do to a viewer or a group of viewers, and therefore Ranboo enjoyers are also canon to the Dream SMP. It's a similar story with YouTube viewers as well, because the blood god himself Technoblade was actually the first SMP member to canonize his chat, calling them the Voices. Techno is notorious for his fourth wall breaks, even asking the SMP's deity Dream XD for a bell with the canonical intent of farming channel memberships, and therefore it's been canon from pretty much Techno's first conflict that his chat, who are well known for things like spamming blood for the blood god and the infamous letter E, please don't spam my comments, please, I beg, oh god, and his donators, who are regularly referenced as a large part of Techno's character motivations, like his attachment to his horse Carl for example, are canon to the plot. The last person who has a canon chat is, no surprises, Philza, whose chat is canonically a murder of prose which follows him around and delivers letters along with other forms of communication for him. Also, that is the word for a group of crows, I looked it up, it's called a murder of crows, and that's so cool. This is further backed up by the fact that Philza's nickname both on the Dream SMP and the Origins SMP is the Crowfather, a reference to the Godfather, and also by the fact that SAD-ist, who at this point basically draws things into the SMP canon with her animatics, drew a message from Phil warning Techno as being delivered by a crow. There are a bunch of headcanons that have also sprouted from this topic as well, like what's the canon explanation for Minecraft's message function? Each character could have a different method of secret communication, much like fact their chats are manifested differently according to their character, with Phil's crows, Techno's voices, etc, etc, which would also help with lore immersion and expansion later on. Speaking of the Crow Father though, Phil has a lot of interesting lore that hasn't actually been covered on any of the Dream SMP analysis channels I follow just yet, with hints at things like a new character, immortality, and even having a connection to the incarnation of death herself. So if you guys want to see that, let me know by getting this video to 10,000 likes, and I'll definitely make that one because it's going to be very interesting. Anyway, these 4 members have canonical chats, but that's not where the evidence for you being canon even stops. You see, as I said earlier, each person's respective chat follows them around, and by extrapolation, I think it's fair to assume that every member of the SMP canonically has a chat that follows them around. But the real kicker here comes with Las Nevadas. The richest members of the server are usually those who grinded for resources, played for a long time, or raided a lot of exotic structures like woodland mansions. Ranboo. But Sam and Quackity together are among the richest members of the server. Although Sam has grinded a lot on the server, don't get me wrong, to consider the duo, their country, as the richest on the server, especially with people like Technoblade and Ranboo who have banded together in the Syndicate, who are both also extremely rich thanks to grinding, begs the question, how are they so rich? Well, in the lore, this was answered with the idea that they own a successful casino, and that seems to make sense at first. Casinos rake in money after all, until you realize that barely any of the actual players on the SMP actually gamble at the casino. In fact, Quackity and Sam were dubbed rich well before any of the SMP members had ever even visited the casino. So, how did they get rich? Well, this theory answers all of those questions. What Quackity and Sam's characters did to get rich, what was so ingenious about the idea of a casino, and the reason people called Quackity so incredibly smart for coming up with the concept, in the lore obviously, wasn't because it was a place to gamble. It was because he was profiting off the viewers, in the canon sense of the phrase at least. The casino is fully attended by and gambled at by canonical Quackity and Sam viewers, who are citizens of Las Nevadas because they constructed it, they hang around near it, and since we already know from before that viewers stay near to their leader or the person they're watching, they were forced to gamble at the casino for hours upon hours, making Las Nevadas extremely rich in the process. This also means that as Las Nevadas grows, with more and more viewers being added to the pool as more and more SMP members are recruited, they'll only get stronger and stronger. And this gives Wilbur's character a much less petty reason to try and build a rival nation to Las Nevadas. He realizes that with the scale of the audience and thereby the citizenship that Las Nevadas has, with the snowball effect that more and more members joining what seems to be the next L'Manberg would have, that only a rival with a similar business venture with the crazy citizenship and therefore captive customer amount that only he and the likes of Tommy and most importantly Ranboo could only garner, only then would Las Nevadas ever be stopped from gaining absolute power over the server, and that is why he and Ranboo made that burger van in the stream the other day. Another point, it is stupidly easy for new countries to be formed on the SMP. Virtually anyone, just by declaring to their chat that they're forming a new nation, can suddenly have an entire nation to themselves, which is extremely implausible if you consider that only the SMP members are on the server. If you consider, however, that Ranboo is walking around with 50,000 people following him, if Phil and Tommy are just chilling with a loyal group of 20k people who will follow them to the literal ends of the earth, suddenly the idea of anyone being able to start a new nation makes a lot more sense, especially given that there are nation states in the world with less people populating them than that. It also suddenly makes sense that L'Manberg was rebuilt and re-inhabited so quickly, how a nation that was in canon blown to the ground was somehow built back in a day or two. Remember what I mentioned earlier? TNT, lava, fire, they don't affect the citizens, they don't affect the viewers. What Wilbur blew up was, in essence, what his unfinished symphony was. He blew up the governmental system of L'Manberg, what he created, where the important people, where the SMP members lived. People still lived in L'Manberg, ruined and ungoverned, which is why it was so easily rebuilt, because people were already there to help, in canon, of course. On the topic of L'Manberg, though, there's another canon mention of the audience, perhaps the most blatant example of the citizens, the viewers of the SMP, having a direct and measurable effect on the SMP's lore. The L'Manberg election. It seems so obvious in hindsight. The election directly and blatantly canonized nearly every person who was a chat member of a member of the SMP at the time, every person who watched the people who were part of L'Manberg at the time, and thereby meant that although Fundy brought the viewer into the SMP physically, although technically Technoblade had them affect his character first, you as a viewer, as viewers rather, as a mass, have been canon in the Dream SMP since the election arc. And that's not all, because you see, one more thing is raised with this theory, and once again it's because of Ranboo. Ranboo, when the lore of the SMP started, was still what we would consider now as a viewer. He didn't have any Twitch subscribers, he didn't pull any viewers, hell, he didn't even have any YouTube subscribers. So in Canon, then, he was one of the citizens. He was one of those tiny little fellows running around in the lore, of course, and somehow, upon being added to the SMP in real life, leveled up from that status in Canon? Does that not break the theory? Well, the explanation for this in the theory, of course, is fairly simple, and actually mirrors real life very well. You see, every single player on the SMP has one thing in common. They all have a crowd around them of their YouTube subs or Twitch subscribers or whatever you want to decide to base it on, and that crowd is of considerable size. It only makes sense then that the viewers themselves have their own little sub-crowds of viewers. Like, for example, you lot would be 70,000 people around me, and once you reach your own certain size of creator, once you hit that crazy milestone or goal as a viewer, your crowd becomes big enough for you to warrant being, well, an actual player on the SMP to warrant being added in real life. There are also notable exceptions like SAD-ist and Derivakat, both of whom have massive followings, but I'd explain those away with the argument that they are on the SMP, in the sense that they're the SMP's camera operator and bard, as has been said on Twitter before. This also ties into a new explanation for the death system, because in this theory, we consider the first 2 deaths of a character, only the first 2, as not actual death per se. It's just reducing their influence, power, or control on the SMP, destroying them publicly in front of their followers, their crowd, and thus humiliating them and effectively killing them, quote marks, on the SMP in the lore. This would mean that, because, for example, Technoblade has never died, his viewers have built up this massive expectation from the Blood God, and therefore his first canonical death will be that much more impactful simply because of the humiliation that being killed as this seemingly unkillable deity would bring to the Blood God. This also explains something like Schlatt's initial banning from the SMP. Instead of him blipping out of existence, it could be something like his social media, which he would use to communicate with his followers and therefore have his crowd on, and him getting banned was that account being suspended or banned or something like that. I made a really cool, long, and pretty movie-like video a few days ago about TommyInnit, so I'd highly recommend you check that out. If not, consider this other video that YouTube thinks you'll like.